Hey guys, it's Dr. May. Thanks for joining me today. I'm back to talk more about understanding target behaviors. And this time we're going to use a model called the cycle of self-harm in order to do that. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can look at this together. All right, so using the cycle of self-harm to understand target behaviors. So what the heck do we mean by all that? All right, well, in the previous video I made, we used a behavior chain analysis, which is a DBT technique to understand target behaviors. And today we're going to do video 2, using a cycle of self-harm. And the next one, we're going to use a model called reacts. So today, we'll start with the definition of target behaviors, so we all are on the same page together. So in DBT, we use the term target behaviors to refer to a whole array of behaviors that people might use that generally are harmful to self, but are designed to help them manage emotions, self-regulate, and or communicate, or even serve other functions as well. So these could include self-injury. It could include aggression. Well, actually, it's more targeted toward other people, but it could also be aggression toward yourself. Eating disorder behaviors, even addictive behaviors, and the whole range of addictions, including substance abuse. So those are kind of ways that seem harmful on the outside, but the inner intent is to try to help regulate yourself and feel better. But we're trying to help people use safer, healthier methods of doing that. So the first step is to kind of understand all about the target behaviors and what leads up to them. So one technique we could use is the cycle of self-harm. So this is from a social worker named Lisa Ferentz, who's kind of famous. She does a lot of talks, and she has some books, and she has a website, which I'll put in the description of this video so you can look her up. And I really like this model because it really, in my experience working with people that self-injure, it really kind of captures the experience that a lot of people have and the cycle that seems to perpetuate itself. So if we start on the left, there's increased vulnerability. So vulnerability could kind of include things such as an undercurrent of stress that's already been going on in your life. It could be physical pain, feeling sick, not eating well, not sleeping well, having other kind of underlying conditions which increase your general stress level and make you more vulnerable to whatever the trigger happens to be for your self-harm. So it's sort of like, well, if I lost control today, and it was the same kind of trigger as the last time, why did I lose control today and not the last time? Well, it might have been because I was more vulnerable because of these variety of reasons. So it's important to identify what the vulnerabilities are. So then there's usually some kind of more specific triggering events, maybe an internal or external event that kind of heightens your stress level and makes you feel more of a strong urge to self-harm. So the triggering event is then followed by a cascade of negative thoughts and emotions about that event. And then it escalates into unbearable tension and anxiety, which is often experienced physically. And then there's a sense of dissociation or analgesia. So dissociation is kind of cognitively zoning out a little bit and not fully being aware, maybe partially aware, but not 100% aware, or your attention's very narrowed and you're not really seeing the whole picture. You're just kind of zoned out in the moment, and it's just you and your self-harm. And the analgesia, is sort of a sense of physical numbing, that you don't fully feel the impact of the harm. You kind of disconnect from that so that it becomes actually easier and possible to do the self-harming behavior because you're not as in the moment really seeing the whole implication of what you're doing and how you're harming yourself. You could be aware and kind of sense it, but you may not be in touch with all the implications. Okay, so then after that happens, the self-harming behavior occurs. And then closer after that, there's some relief or some positive experience that, oh, I feel better. My mind is kind of clear now. Like I'm not as worried. I'm feeling a little bit better. And that's usually relatively temporary. And then negative consequences follow, such as physical consequences, emotional consequences, thinking, oh no, what did I do? Relational consequences, now you got to deal with other people and tell them about it or get help from it or get criticized for it. So there's negative consequences that follow. And then those add to your overall stress level and might set you up to be more vulnerable to being triggered from other things in the future. And it also kind of reinforces your pattern of using the self-harm and makes it more possible for you to use it again and makes it harder to quit. The more you do it, the more you get used to that habit. So these are essentially the components that Lisa Ferentz identifies as part of the cycle of self-harm. So how does this compare to a behavior chain? So in my previous video, I went over the behavior chain analysis, which is used mostly in DBT, but other people use it as well. So here I'm kind of mapping it onto this self-harm diagram. So it starts with increased vulnerability, that you definitely identify your vulnerability factors in DBT as a starting point, but you don't kind of go through exactly the next 4 steps. There's sort of a chain of events, thoughts, emotions, actions, body sensations, etc., in the order that you experience it. So however you imagine and tell your story, in whatever order, different things occur until the final self-harm happens. So it may not exactly fit into this pattern, or it may partially do it, but it may not be quite as structured. So on the original behavior chain, it's kind of more organic. It might feel like to you like exactly what happened in the way you experienced it. Here, you're kind of slotting the experiences into more categorical conceptualizations here. So there's some pros and cons to doing one way versus the other. Sometimes if it's hard to get a grip on the details or hard to get a grip on your pattern, it's good to have these categories to kind of make things a little more clarified for you. So there are some pluses to it. And also DBT definitely doesn't go into any specifics about dissociation or analgesia. This one's a little bit more, specific, whereas some of the other ones are there, but maybe not in this exact order. So then again, so DBT does say, okay, this target behavior occurred. They don't say self-harm behavior per se. They say short-term consequences and long-term consequences rather than giving a value judgment of positive or negative. And it doesn't really end with vulnerability. Although the reality is it does create future vulnerability. DBT doesn't specifically identify that, but Lisa Ferentz does. So some pros and cons with this self-harm cycle here. So one thing you could do is you could make yourself a little chart with the components of this cycle. So it's kind of hard to write it out in a circle, or might be a little messy, although you could do that. But in a linear sort of a way, you can write it out kind of like this. So you would identify in either a specific situation or in your pattern in general, how these different aspects play out for you personally. And then you could go back, kind of like a behavior chain if you want to, and identify for each category, what are some alternate coping strategies I could use? So, you could specifically go into, well, how could I target my thoughts and emotions a little bit differently? How could I deal with these triggers a little bit differently? How could I, do something different at this point? You could kind of go through it in a similar sort of way. All right, so I'm going to go over an example of how to apply this to a real situation. So I'm going to use the same example I used in my behavior chain video. I'm not going to go through alternate coping strategies here because I did that in the first video, and it's going to seem like very repetitious if I do the coping strategies, but it would be a similar sort of idea, okay? All right, so here we go. So just a trigger warning, the example is about cutting. There's mention of self-injury, blood, and scars, and so if that's triggering for you and you're not up to watching this video today, you could shut it at this point. Okay, so use your wise mind to determine if this is right for you and if it's right for you today. Okay, so here's the initial story, which again is the same story I used in the behavior chain video. So lately, I've been kind of stressed about the holidays and being single again. I got an impulsive thought, look up my ex-boyfriend on Facebook, and I saw him in a picture with another woman who I assume is his new girlfriend. I got really upset and started spinning out. And before I knew it, I was in my room cutting myself. I cut deeper than I should have, and I had to go to the ER and get stitches. Now I feel like a jerk for taking a big step backwards after having not cut for 3 months. All right, so that might be the initial story that you tell yourself or you tell your therapist. And now we're going to go in more detail and kind of break it down and see how this story fits into those self-harm cycle categories. All right, so we're looking at vulnerabilities. So the vulnerability is the time of year, the context. It's December, It's holiday season. There's something triggering just about that situation in itself. It makes you more vulnerable to the stress of already being single, which was already stressful. Not being alone is part of the vulnerability in the context. None of my friends were around. It was evening. I was by myself. And so some little minor behaviors already started. I was eating junk food, and that set me up for a stomach ache and not sleeping well. So the not sleeping well, not feeling well because of the stomach ache is already making you more vulnerable in addition to all this holiday stuff going on. So now the next day, so this already happened, and now the next day is coming. Looking on social media, which you might do every day anyway. So what's making it different today? Well, I had these vulnerability factors. Looking at social media, I'm seeing pictures of people and couples dressed for the holidays, their kids, and everyone's looking so happy. I'm judging what people look like and assuming these things. And I'm seeing all this stuff, feeling lonely. I decide impulsively to look at my ex's social media profile. And so what do I see? I go there. I see him with his arms around another girl, smiling, looking like they're happy. Oh, so I'm so triggered about that. And also, if you watch the initial video later, as she's trying to cope with some of these things, she listens to music and a song comes on that makes her feel even worse because it's reminding her of her relationship and what she lost. So that's another trigger that's within the cycle, which could happen. It may not just be one trigger at the beginning. There could be a few triggers over the course of a day, for example. So negative thoughts and emotions, instead of going step by step and where they fit all the way through, I might just go back and identify what are all the negative thoughts and emotions I was having that day around that issue. So these are some of the ones that I kind of put together based on the chain from yesterday, and from the behavior chain video, rather, sorry. So thoughts, how could he do that? How could he find someone else so soon? Did I not mean anything to him? So related to that, I'm feeling hurt, angry, sad, and lonely. Thoughts, I knew he didn't love me. I'm probably not that lovable. Nobody wants to be with me. No wonder I haven't found anyone else since we broke up. So the thoughts are getting even more intense, and so are my emotions. I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling misery. Then I'm thinking it's not fair he gets to move on with his life and be happy while I'm still feeling lonely and miserable. And so now I'm feeling some anger about that. Well, that's not fair. I'm feeling miserable. I'm feeling jealous that he's being taken away from me, even though I lost him already, because there's another woman in his life. Okay, so it's a cascade of these things happening. Unbearable tension and anxiety. So after the buildup of thoughts and emotions, I might get to some sort of a breaking point and really feel physically some of the tension and anxiety, as well as emotionally, as well as cognitively. So body sensations. Maybe I'm hyper aroused. I'm feeling high physical arousal. Maybe my heart is racing. I'm shaky. I'm flushed. I'm hot. I'm tense. I'm agitated. Maybe all that's kind of building up while I'm thinking about all these things. So I'm feeling anxious, angry, shameful, heartbroken, unlovable. My thoughts are, I can't stand it anymore. So this is the unbearable tension. I can't stand it. I hate myself. I hate my life. I wish I could disappear. So now there's a certain desperation coming in. So it's escalating. So I'm getting to the point where I'm getting ready to hurt myself. So in the original narrative, the girl goes to her room where the razors are hidden in a drawer, and she's kind of just in that zone, just her and the razors, getting ready to hurt herself. So the attention's narrowing. She blocks out everything else, goes into her room. It's just me, the razor, my arm. Everything else goes away. It's just that I'm not fully feeling it. I'm feeling it a little bit, but maybe it kind of feels good. So I'm a little trance-like. So it's allowing the self-harm to happen. So the self-harm occurs. So initially feeling a little bit better. So maybe there's some level of relief. Maybe all those thoughts are quieting down a little bit. Maybe my emotions are calming down a little bit. The endorphins are being released and so forth. My arousal is going down. And one of the important questions to ask yourself is, how long does the relief last? And a lot of times it's shorter than you think. So in this case, she's saying relief lasted about 15 minutes. So not particularly long. So negative outcomes. So as she's kind of, coming back to reality, coming back alive again, she's thinking, oh no, what did I do? was such an idiot. Had 3 months of no cutting, and now I blew it. Regret, frustration, anger. Actions. Oh, I had to go to the emergency room to get my wound stitched up. So you're left with a wound. Now you have to make a trip to the ER. And while you're there, you're thinking, oh, the emergency room staff are all looking at me. They're judging me. And that's probably true. A lot of times that does happen. So thinking, oh, what do they look? You know, here I am and they're all judging me. I'm feeling shame and anger at them and myself. So more negative outcomes. So even in the days to come, here I am, I'm stuck with more cuts, stitches, and I know it's going to be more scars. I'm going to have to wear long sleeves to cover them up and avoid, you know, having people look at me and judge me and so forth. And now I'm going to have to, my parents are going to find out, my friends are going to find out, I'm going to have to tell my therapist about this. I have to deal with their reactions and answer their questions. And that could be kind of uncomfortable in and of itself. And there's probably more negative outcomes I'm not even thinking about. So then finally, we're back to the beginning of the cycle again. So this event created some more vulnerability. So because of what happened, I'm left with this lingering regret, and shame, and anxiety. I messed up again. So these kind of feelings, and you know, every time I see it, it's like adding to my stress. The stress that I already had. So I already had stress about the holidays, about being single and alone. And now on top of that, I built on that I hurt myself. So I made everything a little bit worse because now I'm also worried about what if people see my arm? What if they're asking me questions? So the added stress of that might make me more vulnerable to be triggered by something else and then hurt again in the future. Plus, I reinforced my pattern of cutting by doing it again. And now I'm scared I'd do it again because I did it. It happened. I had 3 months of good behavior and then it happened again. So how do I know if I'm good for 3 months, it's not going to happen again? So all that kind of stuff is increasing my vulnerability. All right. So I'm writing all this down in that chart. I'm going back through it and thinking of the different spots where maybe I could have done something differently and broken the cycle. And so this is now part of something I could look at any point. I could always add to it. I could always add more skills to it. I could build more understanding about myself. I could compare this incident to other incidents and learn more about the cycle. And I could catch myself in my cycle as it happens the next time and maybe break it sooner. So I could choose to intervene at an earlier point and do something different, just like a behavior change. So, so that's the general gist of what to do here. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. So I hope that made sense, and be something you could try and add on to the behavior chain, or something just to give it a whirl on its own. Okay, all right, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you again soon. All right, take care.